You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad, Hell's Angel whispered. What happened next stunned everyone. The morning at Los Angeles airport was as noisy as any other day. The rumble of suitcase wheels, gate change announcements over the loudspeaker, children crying, all blending into the rush of hurried travelers. But in that sea of people, Emma Ward, only 17, moved silently like a shadow, clutching the straps of her cheap backpack with both hands, dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights, her steps halting whenever someone got too close. Beside her was Mason Hale, a man in his 40s wearing a perfectly pressed suit, hair neatly combed, a polite smile that sent chills down the spine. His hand rested on Emma's shoulder not to guide her, but to mark ownership, pushing her forward whenever she slowed. To anyone watching, they looked like uncle and niece or father and daughter. The truth was far darker. Emma had been lured by Mason from an online chat group. She believed he was a good person, believed his comforting words, believed the warmth he built with sweet, suspiciously meticulous messages. He said he'd help her escape her toxic family. She believed him. And now here she was, being pulled through every checkpoint, without daring to speak. In the next lane, another man waited his turn. One glance was enough to know he didn't belong in the clean, polished world of LAX. Cole Havoc Maddox, 48 years old, built like a block of steel, silver and black beard, arms covered in faded Hell's Angels tattoos, worn leather jacket, heavy boots, the aura of someone who'd seen darker things than most people here could imagine. Cole wasn't planning to watch anyone. He was just waiting like every other passenger. But his experienced eyes immediately noticed Mason answering for Emma. Every time airport staff asked her basic questions, the girl never looked up, never spoke, never breathed too deeply for more than 3 seconds, as if every reaction needed Mason's permission. Cole saw the slight tremble in Emma's wrist, the way she shrank when Mason touched her, and especially the fleeting glance, quick but desperate, as she tried to find someone in the crowd. Then Emma's eyes met Cole's. Half a second. But half a second was enough for everything in Cole's veins to freeze. It was the look of a child under control, a look he'd seen once before, and that time he'd arrived too late. His heart grew heavy, his throat dry. He stood still, but his gaze carried the weariness of an old wolf. Mason noticed Emma looking at someone, gripped her shoulder harder, and steered her in another direction, still wearing his polite smile for everyone around. Cole watched them go, eyes narrowing, jaw clenched. The loudspeaker called boarding for the New York flight. The crowd parted to form a moving line. Cole stood motionless for a beat before muttering, voice so low only he could hear, "That kid's in trouble." At that moment, LAX was thick with loudspeaker announcements, rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and the endless metal snake of the TSA security line that never stopped moving. Mason Hale stood near the back, his light gray suit impeccable, his hand clamped so tightly around Emma Ward's wrist that her knuckles had gone white, as if loosening even slightly would let her bolt. Emma said nothing and didn't dare look around. Her eyes stayed down, breath short and fast, like a fawn cornered against a wall. Cole Havoc Maddox stood a few people behind them, his leather jacket carrying the scent of the open road, gray beard, eyes cold and sharp from seeing more darkness than most of the world. He wasn't trying to watch, but Emma's timid silence, and the way Mason always spoke for her stabbed straight into the instincts of a man far too familiar with predators wearing nice guy masks. When the line moved forward, a young TSA agent smiled at Emma and asked, "Who are you traveling with?" The second her mouth opened, Mason cut in with a smooth, terrifyingly perfect answer. "I'm her legal guardian. It's her first flight, so she's a little nervous." The way he said it, the confident smile, made the agent nod instantly. No suspicion. Emma lowered her head, silent, and that silence to Cole was a scream being choked off. He folded his arms, eyes narrowed, taking in every tiny detail others missed. Mason kept Emma's passport and boarding pass in his own suit pocket, never handing them to her even for a second. Emma stood so close her shoulder almost touched his ribs, not out of affection, but because she was forced to, and most of all, her eyes were completely empty. The kind Cole had seen the day his daughter disappeared. The eyes of a child who no longer believed she had the right to fight back. When it was Emma's turn at the metal detector, she walked through and it beeped. The TSA agent asked her to step into the secondary lane for additional screening. Mason immediately leaned toward the agent with a fake smile. "Is that really necessary? She gets extremely anxious when separated from me." His voice was polite but laced with suppressed irritation, as if anyone interfering with his property was an insult. Emma visibly shook as she was led to the private screening area. Mason stood right behind her, leaning down as if to shield her, but Cole saw clearly it wasn't shielding, it was to prevent anyone else from speaking to her. Cole took one step forward when he saw Mason turn to complain to another TSA agent. He dropped his voice to a level only Emma could hear, low and calm like an idling engine. "You okay, kid?" Emma didn't dare answer. She just blinked twice, fast, frantic, like an unconscious signal from someone drowning in fear. To a normal person, it was just blinking. To Cole, it was a clearer cry for help than any scream. He straightened up, showing nothing so Mason wouldn't notice. The man turned back immediately, draping his arm over Emma's shoulder with force that made the skin under his fingers dent. "She has anxiety," Mason said, his smile stiff on his perfect face. "I've got her. No one else needs to worry." Cole stared at Mason's hand squeezing Emma's shoulder, and in that moment he saw the past again, a different hand, a different child, and himself standing just seconds too late to save his daughter. His chest tightened but his face stayed ice cold, betraying nothing. When Emma got her shoes, laptop, and backpack back, she bent to pick them up, but Mason slid his arm in and took everything, not letting her touch anything of hers, like he was holding the reins. They walked out of the checkpoint and melted into the crowd. Emma accidentally bumped into Cole, just a light touch, but he felt her whole body trembling, rigid like a wire about to snap. She tilted her head without daring to look up and whispered, voice smaller than a breath, "Please don't leave." The last two words almost dissolved into the loudspeaker noise, but Cole heard them so clearly his heart clenched. Before he could respond, Mason spun around, yanked Emma back to him, and turned her body like an object. When he faced the TSA agent again, he instantly switched to his cheerful, polite mask, thanking them profusely like the kindest man in the world. But the moment he turned away, the smile vanished as if someone flipped a switch, leaving only a cold, irritated face. Cole watched, eyes narrowed with full alertness. He couldn't act rashly, not yet. One wrong move now, and the guy would get Emma farther out of reach. Cole stood there a few seconds, hand resting on his belt buckle, taking a deep breath. This was no longer about strangers at an airport. This was about a kid crying for help without daring to cry out loud. And he had sworn he would never again let a child disappear right in front of him. Mason dragged Emma quickly toward gate B44. Cole relaxed his shoulders and quietly followed, keeping just enough distance to stay unnoticed but close enough that if Emma looked back, even once, she would see he was still there. The only thing he was certain of right now, he wasn't leaving the kid. Not one step. Gate B44's waiting area was packed. The sound of rolling suitcases, kids begging for snacks, and delay announcements blending into LAX's signature chaos. But in that crowd, Emma and Mason sat side by side on the cold metal benches like two opposite sides of an approaching storm. Mason still held Emma's phone, powered off and tucked into his suit pocket, saying lightly as if he cared, "To save battery until we get to New York." Emma just nodded. Hands clenched on her thighs so hard her nails dug into her skin. She didn't dare keep her head up long, but every few seconds she glanced right toward Cole Havoc, Maddox leaning against a pillar, arms folded, eyes fixed on the flight board like any ordinary passenger. But Emma knew he wasn't just standing there. He was watching, he was guarding, and when their eyes met again very briefly, Cole gave the tiniest nod, almost invisible, but to Emma it was a rope keeping her from collapsing. Mason stood when his phone buzzed, telling Emma, "Stay put, don't move." Then he stepped a few meters away to take the call, turning his back as if everything was under control. The instant Mason turned, Emma took a trembling breath, looked around as if afraid someone would hear, then bent her head so low her lips nearly touched her own arm, and whispered so softly that if Cole hadn't been staring right at her, he'd never have heard. He said, "If I say anything, he'll hurt my mom." Cole showed no shock, no wide eyes, no exclamation. He'd heard threats like that too many times from men like Mason. He simply stepped away from the pillar, moving closer but still safe, voice low and calm like they were talking about the weather. "You'll be safe getting on that plane with me." Emma gently shook her head, tears threatening, but she held them back because Mason could look any second. Why are you helping me?" The question slipped out like a child begging for one reason to trust again. Cole looked at her for a long time, long enough that others would find him scary, but Emma saw something warm in his eyes that she couldn't remember ever seeing in anyone. Compassion, protection, old pain. "Because I once lost a kid I didn't save in time," he answered, voice low and heavy like it had been dragged up from a pit. No extra words, no long explanation. It wasn't a story to show off or gain pity. It was a memory full of blood and regret he'd carried for years, and now it was the reason he couldn't turn his back on Emma. She bit her lip, trying to swallow the sob rising in her throat, but no matter how hard she tried to be strong, her shoulders shook. Cole saw everything, but didn't touch her. Not now. Any move could make Mason return in rage. Instead, he angled himself slightly to block others from noticing Emma, like a living wall. From a distance, Mason ended the call and walked back with the confident stride of someone who believed everything was still in his hands. The moment he looked toward the seats, Emma instantly sat up straight, hands neatly in place like a programmed machine. Cole stepped back, resuming his indifferent pose, but his eyes stayed alert like a wolf waiting for the moment to snap the chain. The airport loudspeaker announced, Flight 1183 to New York, boarding Group A. The crowd stood and shuffled into line. Mason placed a hand on Emma's lower back, pushing lightly as a command. Our turn. Emma stood, but before stepping away she glanced at Cole one more time. Not the desperate plea from earlier, but the look of a child who had just decided to trust someone for the first time in far too long. Cole tilted his head just enough to say without words, I'm here. And then the three of them, a trembling girl, a predator with a refined smile, and a biker who looked terrifying but had the warmest eyes in the entire airport, walked toward the gate together, right before the real storm began. Passengers started boarding. Boarding passes rustling, flight attendants greeting everyone in the familiar rhythm of the LAX JFK route. Emma stepped onto the jet bridge, shoulders rigid as Mason placed a hand on her back to hurry her along, and with every step forward her heart pounded as if her body knew something horrific waited ahead. Cole walked right behind them, not too close to draw attention, but not far enough that Mason could maneuver Emma out of sight. Inside the cabin, the cold air conditioning swept across Emma's face, making her shiver. Row 34 was near the back. They had to pass many seated passengers. Emma froze when she saw the seat numbers. 34A. Window, a tight space she couldn't escape if Mason blocked the way. Mason gave a thin smile. Sit down, then nudged her shoulder so she slid all the way to the window. He took 34B as if claiming the air around her too. Cole looked at them for a second, then turned to the middle-aged man about to lift his bag into the overhead bin. Hey man, Cole said calmly. Want a trade? Mine's the aisle. The man glanced at Cole's appearance, startled for a moment, but after a second he nodded fast. I like the aisle. Thanks. The swap was quick and smooth. When Cole sat down in 34C, right next to Mason, Mason's face changed instantly. He looked Cole up and down like an unwanted object, eyes narrowing at the clear Hell's Angels tattoos under the leather sleeve. Mason adjusted his collar, voice low but tight as a wire. You're sitting a little close. Cole didn't react, just leaned back slightly, legs apart like someone used to long rides, eyes staring straight ahead as if Mason wasn't worth noticing. But Emma knew. He had done it on purpose for her. The aircraft door closed with a loud clack. The engines began their steady roar like a distant pack of Harleys starting up. The cabin vibrated lightly as the plane taxied to the runway. In the moment just before the crew announced seatbelts, Cole leaned slightly toward Emma. He didn't look directly at her, so Mason wouldn't suspect, an angle just right for his words to reach only her ears. His voice was almost a breath, but every word hard as steel. You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad. Don't react. Emma's heart stopped. She froze in her seat, eyes wide staring at the plastic wall ahead. But when she glanced at Cole for a split second, she saw not aggression or violence like his appearance suggested, but something strong and sincere she couldn't help believing. Those eyes said clearly, I won't let him take you. Emma didn't dare speak, but her breathing changed, slower, deeper, as if her body had unconsciously found an anchor, and that tiny change instantly put Mason on alert. Baby, why's your face so pale? He asked, voice syrupy sweet but eyes sharp as knives, glancing at Cole with suspicion. Emma flinched, but before she could stumble, Cole flashed a smile that outsiders would read as friendly but Mason would see as a wolf baring teeth. Cole turned to Emma, voice like a father used to calming a teenage daughter. Honey, you don't have to be scared of flying anymore. You're doing better than before. Emma froze for 1 second. Honey, the word landed like a slap across Mason's face. He whipped toward Cole. She's not your kid. Cole stayed perfectly calm, as if he'd just heard the weather report. He shrugged lightly, the corner of his mouth curling into a half smile. Funny, she sure acts like she is. A few nearby passengers heard and turned to look at the three of them, with curiosity. A huge, menacing biker, talking to a trembling girl like father and daughter. A polite businessman-looking guy suddenly losing his cool. The contrast started planting doubt in the cabin. Mason saw eyes turning toward him, forced his smile back, and said quietly but sharply, "We're traveling together. I take care of her." Cole ignored him completely and kept playing the role, leaning down to tighten Emma's seatbelt so it hugged her hips. "This tight is safest," he said loud enough for others to hear. Emma, heart pounding like it would leap out of her chest, gave a tiny nod and whispered, "Yes, Dad." Just one word, one tiny word, but it burned Mason like hot coals poured down his collar. He turned to Emma, eyes flaring for a split second like a man about to lose control. But the moment he saw passengers watching, the polite mask snapped back on. The cabin shook hard as the plane sped down the runway, engine noise rising until the tension felt like a string about to snap. Emma shrank into herself, instinctively leaning toward Cole for safety. Cole rested his hand on her armrest, not touching, but close enough that she knew he was there. Mason watched, his hand clenching into a fist. When the plane lifted off and entered climb, a group of passengers up front were still glancing back. They had started asking questions. Why was the girl terrified next to the polite man? Why did she seem more at ease next to a biker who looked like he just walked out of prison? Those questions had been planted in the cabin, and with questions like that, the truth always finds its way to the surface. Mason felt it, and the irritation in his eyes turned into tightly controlled panic. The moment the plane leveled off and the ding sounded that seatbelts could be removed, Emma sat frozen like a statue, hands on her lap, head down, while Mason glanced at her like checking a possession about to break. Cole stayed relaxed, but his eyes tracked every tiny breath Emma took, and every twitch on Mason's face. He knew this type of man perfectly: polite in public, vicious in private, and most dangerous when he felt his control slipping. Cole leaned in, voice low enough only Emma could hear. "When he asks anything, keep answers short. Don't let him see you panic. Don't argue. Just nod or say I'm tired. He won't have a reason to get mad." Emma swallowed hard, voice almost choking. I don't know how." Cole didn't touch her, just angled his shoulder so the words slid straight into her ear, low and solid like dry stones knocking together. "Just do what I say. Look at me if you're scared. Don't look at him." Mason glanced over, frowned seeing them talk, and Emma immediately flinched, trembling harder. Mason grabbed her wrist, voice sweet but biting. "Emma, look at me, not at him." His grip was so tight her wrist changed color. She let out a tiny pained gasp, too obvious, too painful, and Cole reacted instantly. He placed his hand on Emma's shoulder, gentle but unmistakable, pulling her slightly toward him like a father comforting a child, afraid of flying. "Chest," Cole whispered, deliberately loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "Daddy's got you." The entire cabin's atmosphere shifted in a heartbeat. A woman in the row ahead turned, eyes full of sympathy for Emma. A heavy-set older man nearby shook his head at Mason, as if he already knew who was making the girl afraid. A kid 2 rows back whispered to his mom, "She's scared of flying like I was my first time, right, Mom?" And the more eyes turned to Mason, the more he lost composure. "Take your hand off her," Mason growled, still trying to smile for the audience. Cole didn't let go, not because he needed to hold Emma, but to let Mason know his power had just been taken. "She's just anxious," Cole said lightly, his calm almost a threat. "I'm comforting my daughter." Mason let out a thin laugh like a knife slice, eyes blazing as he answered, "She is not your kid." Cole turned to Emma, ignoring Mason completely, as if the man was too insignificant to address. "Do you want me to stop?" Emma shook her head very slightly, but enough for everyone to understand what was happening. The girl wanted to stay close to the biker, not the man in the suit. Mason saw it clearly, and he boiled. He squeezed Emma's wrist again, harder, trying to drag her back under his control. "Emma," he said through clenched teeth, "look at me. Sit up straight." But Emma didn't dare. She was trapped between terror of Mason and the safety Cole offered. Her body decided first. She leaned a little more into Cole, seeking a patch of solid ground in the pressurized sky. Cole lowered his voice. "Not for Mason, only for Emma. Breathe. Look at me." Emma obeyed. Her breathing was shaky at first but slowed, and when she lifted her eyes to Cole, they held a desperation only those who've witnessed it can understand. A moment of false calm spread. Cole continued, voice warm enough for the cabin to feel but low enough that Mason had no excuse to explode. You didn't do anything wrong. Don't let anyone make you think different." Passengers around them started looking at Mason differently. A woman across the aisle whispered to her husband, "I think the girl wants to sit with the biker more." The husband replied, "Yeah, the suit guy seems shadier." A flight attendant passing slowed for half a second, glancing at the three of them like she was assessing the situation. Mason felt the cabin tilting toward Cole. The control he'd held almost the entire way from LAX was slipping through his fingers. "Fine," Mason said through a strained voice, forcing politeness back on. "Emma's just nervous about the flight. I'll take care of her." But his words carried no weight anymore, because everyone saw Emma tremble when he touched her. They saw her calm when Cole spoke. They saw fear turn into steady breathing when she looked at the biker, not the polished man in the suit. Mason ground his teeth. His hand moved to touch Emma again, but this time Cole blocked it gently. Just one finger placed on Mason's hand and the warning came out soft as breath but heavy as stone. "Don't." Mason jerked his hand back like it burned. Not because Cole was aggressive, but because the biker's eyes were too calm, the calm of a man who'd fought more times than Mason had worn suits. Emma looked at Cole, saw that calm, and for the first time since stepping into the airport that morning, she felt her body no longer being torn away from itself. Mason took a deep breath, trying to rebuild his mask. "The girl is my responsibility," Cole answered instantly, tone unchanged. "No, not today." The cabin fell silent for a few seconds after that, as if the whole plane held its breath. Emma, though her hands still shook with fear, felt one thing very clearly. As long as Cole was sitting there, as long as he looked at her with those eyes, Mason could no longer drag her away easily. Cole tilted his head toward her, so slightly Mason couldn't catch the meaning, and said in a low, warm, fire-forged voice, "You're not alone, not anymore." Emma took a long breath, the first one without tears. She looked out the window at the endless blue sky, and knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time she didn't have to fight it alone. Mason saw everything, and that was what finally made him start to panic. The plane kept slicing through thick layers of clouds, the fuselage shuddering lightly whenever it hit a strong gust. But inside the cabin the real tremor came from Emma's broken breathing. The moment Mason left his seat for the bathroom, leaving her wedged between two voids, to her left the narrow aisle, where strangers sat quietly watching, to her right the small window looking out over endless white clouds, and right beside her Cole Maddox's arms spread like an invisible shield. Taking advantage of the second Mason was gone, Cole tilted his head, voice so low it fit perfectly into the tiny space between him and Emma. "Do you want to get away from him?" Emma wasn't ready. The question punched straight through every trembling defense she'd tried to build since morning. Her lips pressed together. Her chin quivered like wind had blown straight into her heart. And then the tears came. No sound, no sobs, just drops that had waited too long to fall. She choked, voice nothing but shattered breath. "I thought he actually cared about me." Cole didn't say, "No, he doesn't." Or "You were tricked." He didn't use any of the empty phrases that cut deeper than knives. He just stayed silent, the silence of an old leather jacket that had seen too many kids believe they were loved. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but the tears kept coming, and nothing she did could stop the flood that had been dammed up for months. "He started messaging me first," Emma said, fingers clutching the seatbelt, voice shaking like guitar strings hit by lightning. "He told me I was special, that nobody understood me. He sent gifts, had food delivered to my house, even sent money through apps." With every new detail, Cole saw another image overlay, one of a 14-year-old girl with slightly curly brown hair sitting on a pink bed, his daughter. He saw again how she had trusted someone online. He never investigated in time, never listened to in time, never got home in time. Then he started getting angry, Emma whispered, staring at her palms like she was looking at invisible wounds. "He said if I didn't answer his messages, he'd know I didn't appreciate him. He said he could help my mom too, help my mom get out of debt." Emma bit her lip until it bled. "But then he said if I ever told anyone, he'd make my mom disappear." Those two words, "disappear," made Cole grind his teeth so hard the muscle in his jaw jumped. He didn't need any more description. He knew exactly what kind of darkness lived inside threats like that. "And the ticket?" Cole asked, voice so low it sounded like metal scraping stone. Emma nodded, more tears falling. "He bought a one-way, said when we got to New York, I'd have a new life, that I'd be happier, that he'd love me in a way no one else ever could." Her shoulders collapsed. "But I'm scared. I'm so scared." Cole nodded very slowly, confirming that her fear was real, was justified, and was nothing she ever had to apologize for. He didn't interrupt once while she spoke, letting every sentence, every tremble, every piece of pain find its way out of that small body. But when Emma finished, when her breathing broke off and fell silent like a room with the door slammed shut, Cole took a deep breath, his eyes redder than the cabin's amber lights. "Emma," he said softly, voice cracking at the bottom, "you're not the first kid to trust a sick bastard like him." Emma flinched when she heard the word kid, not because it was an act, not for defense, but because it touched the part of her that had always wished someone would call her that with a voice that felt safe. Cole stared straight ahead, but his words were only for Emma. "I had a daughter once." Emma's chest tightened. Cole swallowed hard. She was 14. Smart, kind, laughed a lot, just like you remember doing. Cole's tattooed forearm rested loosely on his knee, but his fist was clenched so tight the nails dug into his skin. One day, a guy I never suspected started messaging her. She believed him, thought he understood her better than I did. His voice dropped until it was nothing but cracked metal. I found out too late. Emma put a hand over her mouth, holding her breath. "I swore," Cole said, eyes blood red like he'd just dipped them into a forbidden memory, "that if I ever saw another kid with my daughter's eyes again, I wouldn't let anyone touch her." A single tear from Cole fell onto his hand, heavy as lead. Emma didn't hesitate anymore. She placed her small, ice-cold hand on Cole's scarred, tattooed one. The touch wasn't begging to be saved. It wasn't fear. It was absolute trust handed to the only person who hadn't lied to her all day. Cole turned and looked at Emma. Their eyes locked, one pair that had lost everything, one pair of a child trying to hold on to the last piece of herself. Emma squeezed his hand tighter, and in that instant, she knew she was no longer alone. Cole would not let Mason take her to New York. Cole would not let her disappear. Cole would fight to the end. Mason came back to his seat just as Emma let go of Cole's hand, but the redness around her eyes hadn't faded yet. He saw it, and the rage in his eyes was only covered by a polite smile so thin it was almost see-through. He sat down, straightened his vest, then placed a hand on Emma's thigh to mark ownership, squeezing hard enough to make her jump. That flinch didn't escape anyone nearby, especially not a female flight attendant who happened to walk past at that exact moment. She stopped half a step, tilted her head, eyes moving from Mason's clenched hand to Emma's pale face. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked, voice soft but alert. Emma opened her mouth but no sound came out. Mason instantly cut in with his perfect, irritating smile. "She has emotional issues, just a little anxiety. I've got her." The flight attendant glanced at Cole, the huge biker in leather, tattoos running down his arms, then back at Mason in his impeccable suit. Every social cue told her to trust Mason. Every instinct told her to trust the child. Cole saw the hesitation as clearly as he saw the sun through the cabin window. He gently placed his hand on the back of Emma's seat, not touching her but creating a clear protective space. "My daughter is perfectly fine," he said. No need to raise his voice, but the deep tone made all three of them pay attention. "The person scaring her is the one sitting next to her." Mason let out a laugh, sharp as metal, scraping steel. "Are you joking?" He turned to the flight attendant, switching to fake kindness. "This man has been harassing us. He's claiming to be her father. He's upsetting her." Then he turned to Emma, squeezing her hand so hard she sucked in a pained breath. But the second the flight attendant looked over, he let go like he'd never touched her. "See, she's unstable," Mason said, loud enough for people around to hear, trying to set the narrative before anyone else could figure out what was happening. The flight attendant started to waver. She looked at Cole with the automatic wariness people in her job have for bikers, troublemakers in every crew room story. But Cole wasn't acting like an aggressive passenger. He wasn't raising his hands, standing up, or threatening anyone. He just looked straight at her, eyes calm, and honest enough to make second-guessing stop. "If you have doubts," Cole said slowly, "check the tickets. Call her mother. Ask her if she wants to sit with me." Emma gripped the edge of her shirt, body trembling slightly. She wanted to scream. Yes, more than anything, but Mason was right there like a shadow, and every breath felt like it belonged to him. Mason instantly blocked with a half-laugh, half-snarl. "The tickets were bought with my card. I'm the one taking her to New York." Cole didn't even glance at Mason. He kept his eyes on the flight attendant. Exactly. A 40-year-old man buying a one-way ticket for a 17-year-old girl who isn't his relative. You don't find that strange? The flight attendant swallowed hard. The cabin started murmuring. A woman 2 rows ahead turned around, exchanging looks with her husband. A young guy with headphones pulled one side down to listen better. An old man 2 seats over let out a heavy breath through his nose, eyes judging Mason from head to toe. The initial silence of the cabin turned into invisible pressure, like the entire atmosphere pressing down exactly where the 3 of them sat. Mason saw the cabin tilting toward Cole and panicked the way only someone losing control panics. He smiled wider, spoke more politely, pulled Emma closer. "We just want a peaceful flight," Mason said, but his voice was starting to crack. "This passenger," he pointed at Cole, "has been following us since check-in. He's dangerous." He emphasized dangerous like he wanted the cabin to remember bikers are always the villains in every news story. But Cole didn't look offended. He leaned back in his seat, the angel wing tattoo on his wrist showing under the leather sleeve. "If I'm dangerous," Cole said lightly, "then why does she only shake when you touch her and not when I get close?" Emma took a sharp breath. That sentence hit the truth so hard she almost started crying right there. The flight attendant swallowed again, then crouched down to Emma's eye level. "Sweetheart," she asked, extremely gently, "do you want to switch seats? Do you want to sit with your dad?" Mason opened his mouth to answer for her, but Cole raised his hand just a little higher than usual. No contact, but enough to stop Mason's words. "Ask her," Cole said, voice heavy as hot steel. "Let her answer." The cabin went dead quiet for half a second. Emma opened her mouth. Her eyes blinked fast. Her fingers gripped her shirt, and even though she couldn't get the words "I do" out, she leaned very slightly toward Cole. No words could have been clearer. The flight attendant saw it. The cabin saw it. Mason saw it. And he knew he had just lost the only power he had left. A passenger called out from behind, "Let the kid switch seats. I saw you squeezing her hand." Another added, "Yeah, let her sit with the biker." Scattered agreement. And exactly. The cabin had completely turned toward Cole. Not loud, not chaotic, but unmistakable. Mason lost all composure, but he couldn't show it because every eye was on him. And Cole just sat there, silent, a solid steel wall between Emma and the man trying to drag her into darkness. From that moment on, the balance had shifted. 30,000 feet up, in the middle of the vast sky, the truth finally found a place to stand. Emma was no longer alone, and Mason knew that could destroy his entire plan. The cabin's atmosphere changed color. After Emma leaned toward Cole, a movement so small it could have been accidental, but enough to shatter the mask. Mason had worn the whole flight. He straightened his vest, forced a smile, but his hands on his thighs were rigid, fingers clenching like he was holding back an explosion. The flight attendant still stood there, eyes locked on Emma, while Cole tilted his head toward the girl, voice low and smooth like a current under darkness. "Listen to me, kid. We need proof. Where's your phone?" Emma flinched slightly, remembering Mason had turned it off and stuffed it into his vest pocket back at gate B44. She glanced at Mason. He was still scanning the cabin, trying to look calm, but the smile on his lips trembled, then whispered, barely audible to anyone else, "In my backpack, front pocket." He moved it from his pocket to there at TSA. Cole gave the tiniest nod, like it was just a reaction to a question about airplane food. He turned to the flight attendant, voice low but firm. "Could you get us a bottle of water?" The flight attendant understood Cole was creating a distraction for Mason. When she walked away, Cole leaned forward just enough to block Mason's line of sight for a second. Then with the lightest touch of a fingertip he signaled Emma to unbuckle her seatbelt. Emma's hands shook so badly she could barely work the buckle, but she did it. "Slow," Cole whispered, eyes never leaving Mason. "He's looking forward, not down at your feet." Emma bent over, half her body sliding out of the seat, trembling fingers pulling the backpack up from the floor. The zipper sound was small but sharp. The cabin was noisy enough to cover it, but to Emma it sounded like a gunshot. She opened the front pocket, reached in, and when her fingertips touched the familiar phone her heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Got it," Emma whispered. Cole covered the motion by reaching up to adjust the air vent, his arm perfectly blocking Mason just as she pulled the phone into her lap. Mason turned, eyes cutting like knives through Cole. "What are you two doing?" Cole didn't change expression. He kept his voice perfectly calm. "She just needed candy from her bag. You're way too tense, man." That unbelievable calm shut Mason up for half a second, and half a second was all Emma needed. She powered the phone on. The screen lit up, And there immediately was everything Mason never wanted the light to see. His messages, months of them. Grooming messages, promises of a future Emma never had, threats to turn her mom into a small problem that needs handling. Messages saying she owed him for the gifts and money. Messages ordering her not to tell anyone. Messages treating her like property. And lower down, a one-way plane ticket bought in Mason Hale's name, matching the day Emma disappeared from California. At the very bottom, a blurry photo of a warehouse on the outskirts of New York, with a short message. This will be home. Be good. Cole looked at it all, not like an outsider, but like a father seeing the ghost of his past again. And the moment his eyes passed over "be good," the vein at his temple throbbed hard. He closed his eyes for one short second to stay calm. When he opened them, they were dark as obsidian. He took the phone from Emma's hand with a slow, careful motion, like he was holding something fragile. Then he pressed the call button for the lead flight attendant. A middle-aged man with a professional air walked over. "Yes, sir?" Cole held the phone out, not like someone complaining, but like a witness in a major trial. "You need to see this, right now." The lead flight attendant frowned, but 3 seconds after looking at the screen, his expression changed. Doubt, shock, confirmation, all slid across his face like waves hitting rock. He looked up, voice low. "I need to show this to the captain." Mason shot to his feet, seat slamming back with a loud bang. "What is this? You're trying to frame me," he almost shouted. A few passengers jumped. Cole didn't stand. He didn't need to. He just said, voice lower than the engines, "Sit down." And somehow those 2 words, just 2, made Mason freeze like someone hit his off switch. The lead flight attendant hurried toward the cockpit. The cabin started buzzing. Eyes began turning toward Mason like a quiet trial was taking place. Emma shakily pulled her seatbelt back on. Cole placed his hand on the back of her seat. Not touching, but enough for her to feel safer. 60 seconds later, the cockpit door flew open. The captain's voice came over the intercom, not loud, but clear enough for the rows around them to hear, "We have a level 2 trafficking suspicion." The cabin went completely silent. A few passengers lifted their heads fully. A mother pulled her child closer. Mason stood frozen. Level 2 wasn't minor. It was the airline's internal code for cases likely involving illegal transport or coerced victims. The lead flight attendant stepped out, face more serious than anyone had ever seen. "Sir," he said to Mason, "I need you to remain seated. Do not touch the girl. She's mine." Mason snapped, the words accidentally revealing everything. The entire cabin held its breath. Cole stood up for the first time since boarding. He didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't raise a fist. He just stood straight, tall as a wall, silent as a verdict, staring straight at Mason. Every muscle on Mason's face twitched. He took half a step back. The captain announced over the intercom, "The aircraft will be given priority landing. All passengers remain seated." A few people gently patted Emma's shoulder. An older woman said softly, "We're here with you, honey." The cabin, complete strangers, had turned fully toward the girl, and all because one phone was turned on at the right moment. Mason had spent a lifetime building the perfect story, but one glow from a screen, and the truth found its way out of the cage he'd kept it in. Cole placed his hand on Emma's back again, heavy but warm. "It's over. You don't have to prove anything else." Emma let out a long breath, like her whole body had just been freed from a rope around her neck, but Cole knew the biggest storm was still coming, and it would explode the moment the plane touched the ground. All the tension was tightening like a guitar string, only a few thousand feet left between them and the point of no return. Mason knew he was losing. Yay! Cole knew he was about to lose it completely. The level 2 trafficking suspicion announcement still echoed in the cabin. When Mason truly started to unravel, he sucked in a sharp breath, trying to rebuild his polite mask, but the lines on his face were stretched like steel wire pulled past its limit. He whipped toward Emma, voice low but sharp as needles. "Come with me, now." Emma flinched, hands instinctively gripping her seatbelt. Mason leaned down into her face, hissing through clenched teeth. "Get up." "Bathroom. We need to talk privately." His breath was hot and furious, no trace left of the refined man he'd pretended to be the whole way. Emma shook her head, barely visible, but Mason caught it instantly. He grabbed her elbow and yanked hard. "Say you're fine. Stand up," he growled, low enough not to be a full shout, but poisonous enough to freeze Emma like a trap snapping shut. He started pulling her out of the seat when Cole's shadow blocked the aisle, silent, immovable as a wall that couldn't be climbed. Cole didn't use force. He just stood there, broad shoulders filling the entire path, eyes like cold metal glinting under the cabin lights. "She's not going anywhere with you." One simple sentence, low, calm, no threat, but heavy as a prison door slamming shut. Mason froze, then exploded like the last card had just been taken from him.
"Get out of my way,"
he screamed, face red. "Who the hell do you think you are getting between us? She's mine, got it?" The cabin erupted in murmurs. The older woman from earlier shot to her feet, voice shaking but fierce. "I saw you squeezing her arm. Nobody calls that caring." A young guy in the row behind pulled his headphones off and leaned forward. "Dude, sit down. She clearly doesn't want to go with you." A middle-aged man called out, "Let the biker handle it." For the first time since boarding, Mason realized he was surrounded, not just by Cole, but by an entire cabin of strangers, every pair of eyes fixed on his behavior. The one thing Mason couldn't stand was losing control, and he was losing everything. He tried to flip the script, pointing at Cole. "He threatened me. He's been stalking us since the airport. He wants to hurt." "Enough." Cole cut him off with one short word. He didn't step forward, didn't step back, just stood between Mason and Emma like a fortress wall. "She's not going anywhere with you," Cole repeated. Slower, each word hammered into the cabin floor. "Not now, not ever again." Mason lost the last of his mind. He swung an arm to shove Cole out of the way, but Cole only lifted his elbow slightly, blocking the push like brushing aside a light breeze. The difference in strength was so obvious it made Mason look like he was flailing desperately in front of a steel statue. "You'll pay for interfering," Mason hissed, lungs heaving like he wanted to spit out every last drop of venom. But before he could lunge at Cole, two male flight attendants rushed over, one blocking Cole, one blocking Mason. "Sir, sit down immediately," they shouted in unison. "The aircraft is preparing for emergency landing." They didn't touch Cole. They stood between to keep Mason from causing more chaos. A ding sounded, the fasten seatbelt sign. The captain's voice came over, calm but ice cold. "This is the captain. All passengers must remain seated. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." The cabin instantly turned into controlled chaos. Passengers shoving bags under seats, buckling belts, kids crying, adults whispering. An older man 3 rows back called out, "I saw him pulling the girl. I'll testify." Another woman, "I'm ready to talk to the police." Support spread like waves. The entire cabin was standing with Emma. Mason looked around. Panic real now. "You're all being fooled," he screamed, voice breaking. "She's mine. I paid for her ticket." "That's exactly why we're making an emergency landing, asshole." A young guy shouted back. The lead flight attendant returned, face hard as stone. "Sir, sit down or we will restrain you." Mason stood panting, eyes bloodshot, like a cornered animal. He glared at Emma, eyes full of hate, like he wanted to tear her apart before the world took her from him. Emma instinctively shrank closer to Cole. Cole glanced at Mason for 1 second, one look enough to warn, "If he touches her one more time." But Cole did nothing. He didn't need to. He had already won, and the cabin knew it. Finally, Mason was forced back into his seat by the combined force of the crew and the furious stares of 10 people around him. He buckled his belt with jerking breaths, jaw clenched so tight his temple throbbed non-stop. Cole sat back down, body like a silent block of steel, hand resting on Emma's seat as a shield. Emma was still shaking, but for the first time she could breathe for a few seconds without fear of being dragged away. The captain spoke again. "Prepare for emergency descent." The plane shuddered hard as it dropped altitude fast. All talking stopped. Only the whistle of wind, the creak of metal under pressure, and Emma's heart pounding under her white-knuckled grip on the armrest remained. Cole stared straight ahead, broad shoulders shielding almost the entire space. He didn't look at Mason. He didn't need to. He knew the moment the plane touched the ground, the truth would be fully unlocked. And Emma, for the first time since morning, was about to be free. But before the wheels hit the runway, the real storm still hadn't broken. It was hanging in the sky, waiting for the second everything would burst open. The plane shook hard as it began its descent, the engines roaring beneath the belly, like a massive beast trying to hurl itself to the ground faster than normal. The packed cabin fell dead silent. No one dared move, everyone pinned to their seats by the violent pull of the emergency descent. Mason's face went ashen. Whether from fear or rage was unclear, his hands gripping the seatbelt until his knuckles turned white. Emma clutched the armrests, chest heaving, eyes wide with anxiety as the cabin lights flickered faintly under the air pressure. Cole leaned toward her, his voice swallowed by the whistling wind but still heavy and solid as a vow. "You're almost safe. Just tell the truth." Emma swallowed, throat bone dry, but nodded. She wasn't crying anymore, just shaking. But it was the shake of someone about to step out of hell, not someone about to be dragged into it. The plane tore through the final cloud layer, then tilted slightly, wheels aimed at JFK's runway like an arrow about to strike its target. When the wheels hit, the thud, screech boomed through the cabin. The whole aircraft jerked forward violently. A few passengers screamed. Emma gasped. Cole placed his hand on the back of her seat, a rock-solid anchor. The plane braked so hard the seat belts dug into everyone's stomachs. Finally, after one long shudder, the Boeing 777 slowed, rolling into the emergency response area, where a line of police cars, airport security vehicles, and a black FBI SUV were already waiting. The cabin door stayed closed, the "Remain Seated" sign still glowing bright red. In that strange silence, Mason began yelling desperately. "Don't listen to him. She's mine. He's kidnapping her. I'm the one who quiet." The lead flight attendant spun around and snapped, voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Stay in your seat." Mason opened his mouth to argue, but shut it when he met the man's ice-cold stare. A loud click came from the front door. Every head turned at once. The aircraft door opened, but no one was allowed to stand. 3 FBI agents in black windbreakers with gold badges stepped onto the jet bridge, faces carved from stone. One announced loudly, "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Nobody moves." Passengers held their breath. For many, this was the first time they'd seen the FBI board before the crew even finished their duties. Cole sat still, shoulders taut as steel cables, eyes never leaving Mason. Mason forced a crooked, desperate smile, trying one last time to rebuild his story. "I think there's a misunderstanding. She's family. That man, he's been following us." The FBI ignored him and walked straight down the aisle. One agent stopped in front of seat 34B, where Mason was shaking but trying to look calm. "Name?" "Mason Hale," he answered, voice trembling like a man on the edge of a cliff. "Where's the girl?" Another agent asked. He pointed at Emma. "She's no," Cole said, voice low but ringing clearer than the dying engines. "Don't let him speak for her." The agent looked at Emma, crouched to her eye level, tone gentle but dead serious. "Sweetheart, do you know this man? Is he related to you?" The cabin held its breath. Emma opened her mouth. No sound came out. She looked at Mason, whose eyes were wide, signaling frantically, the look like a knife to her throat. "Say it, or your mom dies." She looked toward the aircraft door, where agents formed an unbreakable wall. She looked down at her palms, where Mason's threats still felt inked in permanent stains, and finally she looked at Cole. Cole gave the tiniest nod, just one nod, but it was the drumbeat that opened the last door inside her heart. "Tell the truth," Cole whispered, voice like the final rope pulling her out of the dark. "I'm right behind you." Emma drew a long breath, body still trembling but eyes suddenly bright with a light Mason never wanted to see. "Will." Then she spoke, loud enough for the 3 rows in front and behind to hear clearly. "I don't know that man. He tricked me." The cabin exploded into murmurs, as if a secret trial held mid-air had just been thrown open to the world. Mason screamed instantly. "She's lying. She's Iv. Enough." An agent pressed Mason's shoulder back into the seat, hands where I can see them. "I'm the only one who takes care of her. I don't say another word unless you want to hurt yourself worse," another agent said, voice cold as cut steel. Mason froze, sweat pouring down his temples. The FBI immediately yanked him to his feet, twisted his arms behind his back, and cuffed him with metal handcuffs, the click-click sounding like the final note for a man falling from a fake heaven straight into real hell. Emma flinched as Mason was dragged past, and panicked when he turned one last time, eyes full of hate, as if he wanted to swallow her into the darkness he lived in. Cole saw that look. He instantly stood, took one step sideways like a living shield, blocking Mason's entire view of Emma. Mason disappeared from the cabin, shoved down the jet bridge surrounded by police and agents. Emma exhaled, but her body nearly collapsed into the seat from exhaustion and relief. A passenger behind her rested a hand on her seat back. "You were so brave." Another said, "Good job, kid." Emma didn't dare look at anyone. She pressed her forehead to her knees and cried silently. Cole bent down, placing a hand on her back so lightly, as if she might shatter under too much pressure. "It's over," he said, voice low and warm. "You're safe now." An FBI agent turned to Cole. "You're the one who raised the alarm?" Cole just nodded. No bragging, no explanation. The agent nodded back, eyes full of respect and gratitude. "Good, Cole. You saved her life." A flight attendant brought tissues for Emma, and the cabin slowly relaxed, as if everyone had just survived a terrible storm they'd all been caught in. But amid the chaos, Emma saw only one thing. Cole standing there, silent, solid as a pillar holding up the sky. A wingless angel made of skin, scars, and a leather jacket that smelled of long roads. And as Mason was led away in steel cuffs, Emma knew her life had just been bent in a completely different direction, by a man she had been terrified of that morning, by a biker, a good man, a man who had stood behind her while she told the hardest truth of her life. The plane still sat motionless on the tarmac, but Emma's life, for the first time, had begun moving toward the light. As soon as the door reopened after Mason was taken away, Emma was escorted through a separate secure corridor at JFK, away from curious passenger eyes, with Cole walking right behind her, every step a shield of flesh and bone. The hallway was narrow and coldly lit, smelling of metal and cleaning chemicals. 2 FBI agents led them to an isolated interview room, one-way glass, harsh fluorescent lights. Emma sat on the edge of the chair, arms wrapped around herself, eyes still swollen from the biggest shock of her life. Cole stood beside her, not sitting, back straight, arms folded, eyes scanning the glass as if watching for anything that might step out of the shadows. In the next room, Mason was shoved into a metal chair, hands still cuffed in front of him. He tried a fake smile, but his face twitched, sweat streaking down his temples. "I didn't do anything wrong," Mason said. The moment the recording light turned on, "The kid's making it up. I was taking her to help her mother." "I have proof." "Light your chair. You're climbing the wall with your fingernails." "Mason," Agent O'Reilly said, voice even and sharp as a razor. "We've seen the phone, the messages, the one-way ticket, the warehouse address." "She's mine," Mason exploded, voice cracking like breaking glass. "I bought her gifts. She agreed to come with me." "A 17-year-old cannot consent to what you had in mind," O'Reilly replied, unmoved. "She is a victim." Mason slammed his cuffed hands on the table, metal clanging against steel with an ear-splitting screech. "She's lying. She tricked me." Another agent opened a thick file, flipped a few pages, and looked at Mason like he was watching an animal about to strangle itself in its own trap. "You were investigated 3 years ago in Nevada. Charge, grooming minors. Case dropped for lack of evidence. This time it's different." Mason went ghost white, eyes darting wildly. "But we what? That was a misunderstanding. You have the right to remain silent," the agent said, voice chillingly calm. "I suggest you use it right now." Mason opened his mouth again, but when the agent slid printed copies of the messages he'd sent Emma over 3 months across the table, he went mute. His lips moved like a man suddenly robbed of air. In the next room, Emma watched through the frosted glass, seeing Mason's silhouette screaming something she could no longer hear. She shuddered, shoulders curling inward, and began to sob quietly. Cole crouched down, head level with hers, voice warm like exhaust from an engine on the open road. "It's okay. He can't touch you anymore. Never again." Emma covered her face with both hands, tears spilling through her fingers. I didn't think I'd ever get away." "You did get away." Cole's voice didn't waver once. "Now they need to hear the story from you, and you have to tell the truth. You've already been so strong. Just finish this part." A female agent entered and asked Emma to come to the next interview room. Cole started to stand and follow, but was stopped. "Sorry, sir. Only the victim." Cole straightened, eyes going cold for a moment, but he didn't argue. He said only one sentence, slow and certain, a warning to everyone handling the case: "Be gentle with her." The female agent nodded. "We will." Emma walked in, hands shaking so badly she had to grip the chair to sit. The recording light turned on, the lamp shining straight onto her face, highlighting the red marks on her wrist where Mason had squeezed too hard. O'Reilly sat across from her. "Emma," he said, professional but not without kindness, "you can tell us whatever you want. We're not forcing you. Just start with how you met him." Emma took a deep breath. Then she began. Every sentence broken, every breath trembling, every tiny detail. She told them about the first gift, the promises of love, the long messages that wrapped around her like ropes, the threats against her mother's life, the plane ticket, the sleepless nights, the way Mason looked when he forced her through TSA, the way he squeezed her hand on the plane. She told them everything, nothing held back. Each word pulled another piece of fear out of her, leaving her chest lighter and lighter, until she realized she was breathing normally again. When she finished, the room was silent for several seconds. O'Reilly set his pen down. "Thank you, Emma," he said, sincerely. "You just helped us close a lot of cold cases, and maybe save other kids." Emma covered her mouth, tears pouring down. This time they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of release. At the same moment in the next room, Mason was lifted out of the chair by two large agents and dragged out like an empty sack. He screamed, cursed, stomped, thrashed, everything useless. When the door opened for a second, Emma saw him being hauled down the hall, face twisted with hatred and despair. But he had no power left, no way to touch her, nothing left to hold. And in that moment, Emma realized for the first time, he was far weaker than she'd ever thought. He was only strong when she stayed silent. She was silent no longer. When the agent brought Emma out of the room, Cole was still standing exactly where he had been, leaning lightly against the wall, arms crossed, eyes never leaving the interview room door. When Emma stepped out, legs shaking like they might give way, Cole walked straight to her, no questions, no need for details. He asked only one thing. "You okay?" Emma didn't answer. She threw herself into his chest, hugged him tight and cried like she was finally allowed to. "You saved me. For real." She choked, voice mixed with tears. Cole wrapped his arms gently around her back, an embrace that was warm but never intrusive, like a father holding a daughter who had lost the whole world and just found safety for the first time. "No," he said, voice rumbling like a highway engine but softening at the end. "You saved yourself. I just stood behind you so you wouldn't fall." Emma cried harder. An agent watching from a distance turned away to give them a moment of privacy. In that instant, inside the cold FBI office, under harsh white lights and stacks of crime reports, a biker stood holding a teenage girl while she sobbed because she was finally free, and no one looked at him like he was dangerous anymore. No one saw the tattoos as threats. They saw a man, a good man, who had fought for a child the world didn't even know was being hunted. Night was just beginning outside the New York windows, but inside this room, the darkest chapter of Emma's life had closed, and the new one, full of light, had begun the second she told the truth. Cole placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Let's go," he said softly. "You've got a lot of good things waiting ahead." And for the first time, Emma believed it was true. After hours of working with the FBI, once every statement had been recorded, Mason had been transferred to federal detention, and his file sealed with a long list of new charges. Emma was taken to a special security waiting room at JFK, a small space with a black leather sofa, warm amber lighting, and a large window overlooking the night runway, glittering with taxiway lights. Emma sat curled up on the long couch, a cup of hot cocoa in her hands, eyes tired but no longer filled with the panic they'd held before. Cole stood in the corner, hands in the pockets of his leather jacket, quiet as a large, steady shadow. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence alone made the room feel less cold. The door flew open and hurried footsteps echoed. A woman burst in, brown coat still unbuttoned, hair messy from running, breathing hard. Emma's mother. "Emma." The word broke into a sob. Emma looked up, eyes wide, and in that instant, every ounce of strength she'd been clinging to for hours shattered completely.
"Mom!"
Emma shot off the couch, ran to her and threw herself into her mother's arms like a little child. Mother and daughter held each other so tightly, the room seemed to shrink until it contained only the sound of their crying. Her mom stroked Emma's hair, kissed her forehead, voice cracking with every syllable. "My baby, I thought I'd lost you. I thought Emma. Emma." "I'm sorry," Emma choked out. "I was scared. I didn't know what to do. It's okay. It's okay now. You're here, safe, with me." She squeezed her daughter as if trying to make up for every minute Emma had endured alone. Cole turned his head slightly, giving them privacy, but his eyes softened, a gentleness rare in a man covered in old leather and older scars. After a while, Emma's mom let go, wiped her tears with her sleeve and finally turned to Cole. She froze for half a second when she saw him. A huge biker, silver-streaked beard, heavy leather jacket, Hell's Angels ink curling around his wrist, but the next moment her eyes filled with deep gratitude. "You," her voice broke. "You're the one who saved my little girl." Cole gave a small shrug, refusing the hero title. "The kid saved herself. I just happened to be there." "No." She shook her head hard. "Without you, my daughter." She choked up again. "Thank you. I don't know how to say anything but thank you." "No need to thank me," Cole said, low and honest. "Just keep her safe. That's enough. If you ever need anything, money, expenses, anything." "No," Cole cut in, gentle but firm. "I don't take money from a mother who almost lost her child." Emma's mom let out a tearful laugh. "You're a lot kinder than you look." Cole shrugged again, the corner of his mouth lifting into a thin, rare, kind smile. "The looks just to scare guys like him." Emma watched them, then walked over to Cole. She looked tiny next to him, but her eyes were completely different now. No fear, only deep trust and genuine gratitude. "Uncle Cole," she said softly. Cole bent down a little so he could hear better. "Will I see you again?" A small question that carried a big fear. The fear that the only person who had stood by her when she was weakest would disappear like he'd never existed. Cole looked at her straight, warm, unflinching. "If you ever need me," he said, voice like metal forged in fire, solid and gentle at once, "I'll show up." Emma pressed her lips together, then threw her arms around him one more time. Cole didn't squeeze hard like he had when she collapsed after the interview. This time he just rested his hand lightly on her back, a promise that the world wouldn't fall on her again. "You're strong," he said, voice low. "Don't ever let anyone make you think different." Emma nodded against his chest. An agent stepped in to say they needed to finish some final paperwork before Emma and her mom could leave. Emma stepped out of Cole's arms, eyes brighter, breathing steadier. Before following her mom out, she turned back to Cole one last time. No words were needed. That look carried all the gratitude, all the trust and the invisible bond this day had created. Cole gave a small nod, a silent promise. When the door closed behind them, Cole stood alone in the quiet room. He exhaled, long and slow, a mix of relief and quiet sadness. He had saved this child. He had done what he hadn't been able to do for his own daughter. And on a cold New York night, that was enough to make the weight on his heart a little lighter. Outside the window, city lights reflected off the airport glass, sparkling like thousands of tiny hopes. Emma had found her mom again, and Cole still had a long road ahead. But tonight he let himself stand still for a few minutes, believing the world still had room for kindness, even when it wore leather and scary tattoos. A few days after the rescue at JFK, Emma's life settled into a new rhythm. Not easy, not perfect, but healthier and safer than any day before it. Boston looked different in her eyes, as if the city had been washed clean by a heavy rain, leaving air so clear she'd never noticed it before. Her mom took her to therapy 3 times a week, and Emma didn't fight it. She knew she needed to slowly untangle the invisible ropes Mason had wrapped around her mind. The nightmares still came, but they were no longer razor sharp. They faded like overexposed photographs losing their color. At night she still woke up sometimes, but instead of feeling suffocated, she simply sat up, looked out her bedroom window at the streetlights painting the ceiling, and knew she was home, safe. She started school again, old friends whispered. Some asked why she'd disappeared, some made guesses, but Emma didn't explain. She didn't need to. She no longer felt she owed the world an apology for what someone else had done to her. She still wore long sleeves to cover the old bruises on her wrists, but she no longer walked with her head down in the hallways. She didn't avoid people's eyes. Whenever she felt the urge to shrink and hide, she remembered Cole, how he had stood between her and the darkness, how he had said, "You didn't do anything wrong." On those days, Emma wrote something, not a diary, not a statement anymore, but words straight from her heart, an email, to the man who had changed the direction of her life, to Cole Maddox. Subject: "Thank you. I don't know if you'll even read this. You said you didn't need thanks, but there are things, if I don't say them, I'll feel like I'm still holding on to a piece of the fear. I slept 2 whole nights without nightmares. First time in months. I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. When Mom turns off the living room light, I don't imagine Mason appearing at the door. When I walk to class, I'm not scared of men passing me in the hallway. And last night, for the first time, I actually laughed at a stupid video online. I really laughed. You made me believe in kindness again. For the first time in years. I don't know why you chose to help me, but I want you to know, I will never forget. Thank you, Emma." Emma read the letter 3 times. Her hands shook a little, but not from fear, from emotion. Then she took a deep breath and hit send. Nervousness pounded in her chest. But once it was sent, her heart felt lighter than she expected. On the other side of the country, in Salt Lake City, Cole Maddox was sitting in a small roadside diner, an old-style place with flickering neon and the faint smell of slightly burnt coffee. He was on his way west again, not running from anything, just doing what people like him do. Keep moving, keep going, keep showing up where they're needed most. The plate of pancakes in front of him was still hot, but he wasn't eating. He was staring at a folded road map on the table, as if looking for a destination he wasn't even sure he wanted. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. He pulled it out, an old scratched smartphone. When he saw the sender's name, he froze. Emma Ward. Cole didn't open it right away. He set the phone down, took a long breath, then he opened it. As he read each line, his broad shoulders dropped, not from sadness, but from something inside him loosening. Emma's words, small, innocent, brutally honest, cut through his mental armor like a hot knife through butter. He read, "I'm not afraid of the dark anymore." 3 times. He read, "You made me believe in kindness again." Twice more. Then he stopped at the last line. "Thank you." Cole set the phone down and rested his forehead in his hands for a few seconds. He didn't cry, but his eyes went red, full of memories he'd kept locked in his chest for years. He opened his wallet. In the inside pocket was a small photo, a 14-year-old girl with lightly curly brown hair, smiling bright under the sun. His daughter. He touched the edge of the photo, as if touching a memory he'd once let slip away. His voice came out very softly, only for himself. "Dad saved one this time." The words dissolved into the clatter of the kitchen, the clink of spoons and cups, the rumble of trucks passing outside. But for Cole, it was an admission he had never dared say out loud. He looked at Emma's email again. Then he smiled, a gentle smile that rarely existed on his weathered, scarred face. The smile of a man who had just found a piece of himself he thought was lost forever. He stood up, left a double tip, pulled on his leather jacket, and stepped outside where the evening cold slapped his face, carrying the familiar smell of the open road. And in those heavy but certain steps, something felt lighter. Cole knew he would keep riding, keep protecting, keep showing up where darkness thought it ruled. Because there were still kids out there who needed an angel in leather. And that night, in a diner in Salt Lake City, a biker smiled softly and knew at least once he had beaten the darkness. Walking out of the Salt Lake City diner, Cole Maddox stepped into the road, the evening chill brushing his face like a reminder that the road was still long. He tucked his daughter's photo back into his wallet, zipped his leather jacket, and pulled a plane ticket from his back pocket, a flight to Denver, leaving early morning. A short stop, not because he loved flying, but because there was somewhere he needed to be, something he needed to do, things no one paid him for, no one asked him to do, but men like him always knew when it was time to show up. The next morning, early sunlight filtered through thin clouds over the Utah mountains, shining down on the endless runway. Cole walked into the terminal, with his worn backpack over one shoulder, heavy boots, and eyes sharp but calm. He didn't draw attention, but anyone who looked closely felt the presence of a man who had walked through many dark corners of the world and was still standing tall. While waiting in the boarding line, Cole pulled out his phone and read Emma's email one more time. Not because he doubted it, but because it was a small piece of light that helped him keep going. Every tiny word from that girl reminded him that saving one child doesn't just change their life, it saves a part of the soul of the person who thought that part had died the day his own daughter never came home. A young flight attendant scanned his boarding pass and gave the standard airline smile. "Safe travels, sir." Cole nodded, a brief smile flashing like a rare ray of light across the rough, sun-beaten lines of his face. "Thanks," he said, and walked on. But a few steps later he paused. He didn't know why, maybe the instinct of a biker who had lived too long on the road, or the radar of a man too used to sensing danger from miles away. He looked out the big terminal windows at the busy tarmac, luggage carts, giant planes waiting to be pushed back, and in that moment he thought quietly, there are a lot of kids out there who need to see the danger before it's too late. The thought wasn't philosophy, wasn't a motto, wasn't something he wanted to say out loud. It was simply the truth he carried in his chest, like steel that had once been red hot and hammered into the strongest thing in his life. He walked through the jet bridge. Inside the cabin, the smell of new leather seats mixed with passenger chatter and the steady hum of overhead air. Cole sat in an aisle seat, stowed his backpack under the seat in front, buckled his belt. He didn't like flying. The highway under his own wheels was still better, but sometimes, to reach the people who needed him, he had to take the sky. A little boy in the row to his left stared at Cole with curious eyes. No fear like most adults showed. "Are you a Harley guy?" the kid asked quietly. Cole turned, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You know Harleys? My dad has one," the boy said excitedly. "He says bikers always keep their word." Cole nodded, looked out the window for a second, then back at the boy. "Your dad's right." The boy grinned, then turned back when his mom gently tugged his shirt. But the admiration in those young eyes reminded Cole of something he often forgot. Not everyone who looked at him saw the scars, the ink, the past. Some people looked at him and just saw a good man, even if he would never call himself that. The cabin speakers announced, "Prepare for takeoff." The lights dimmed, the plane began to taxi, vibrating lightly as it left the gate. Cole leaned his head back and closed his eyes for a few seconds. Every time a plane lifted its wheels off the ground, he thought of the moment Emma was led down the jet bridge at JFK, the look in her eyes the last time she saw him in the secure room, grateful, relieved, sad and bright, all at once. A girl who had stood in front of darkness and still chose to trust the man in leather sitting beside her. The plane sped down the runway, wind screaming past the metal skin. Cole opened his eyes. The world outside blurred as the huge aircraft lifted off the ground and banked toward the blue. The vast sky stretched ahead like a road with no end. Up there between clouds and sunlight, Cole felt something like a soft breath pass through his chest. Not wind, not the engines, but a small peace he rarely allowed himself to feel. A reminder that he no longer had to carry the pain like a useless burden. He had saved one child, and sometimes saving someone else is exactly how a person saves himself. As the plane reached the first layer of clouds, Cole leaned back, his gaze distant but no longer heavy. He whispered, not for anyone else, only for himself, and maybe for the spirit of the girl in the photo he always carried. There are a lot of kids out there who need to see the danger before it's too late. The plane pierced the clouds, white light flooding the cabin like someone had thrown open a huge door into peaceful sky. Cole closed his eyes and let his breathing even out. He wasn't an angel. He knew that better than anyone. But sometimes, not all angels have wings. Some wear leather, carry ink, have eyes that have seen the deepest darkness, and show up exactly when you need them most. And thousands of feet above the earth, on his way to Denver, a biker was flying through bright clouds, ready for whatever journey came next. His life didn't need fireworks, didn't need titles, didn't need anyone to call him a hero. It only needed one thing. If somewhere out there a scared kid looked up with pleading eyes, he would show up again, like a promise that never expires. If you loved this story, subscribe so you don't miss the next emotional and gripping journeys. See you in the next stories, where the leather-winged angels still show up exactly when you need them most.